Soviet Union. In 1954, Executive Director Hunting was subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury and was forced to surrender all the council's documents relating to their communications with African National Congress of South Africa. The council, effectively crippled by the investigation of HUAC, was dissolved in 1955. Meanwhile, Hunting served 6 months in prison for refusing to reveal the names of the contributors to the Civil Rights Bail Fund. In May 1952, Jurgen was named as a communist by a former staffer of the National Negro Congress and called to appear before the House Un-American Activities Committee. There, he disowned his earlier political convictions, vigorously denying any willing association with communism. His biographer, David Henry Anthony III, refers to the relentless, still largely secret pressure to which he and his family were subjected by the intelligence community. Only Jurgen himself and those who convinced him to turn kneel only Jurgen himself and those who convinced him to turn knew what forced his hand. It is not to be found in Jurgen papers, observed Anthony. It is hinted that in his FBI file, however, where among bowdlerized, whatever that is, what is that? Bowdlerized or bowdlerized. Damn it, I've never seen that word before. B-O-W-D-L-A-R-I-Z-E-D. Bowdlerized. Anyway, forget it. And redacted documents lie the traces of betrayal or vengeance or other emotionally laden acts by which sensitive material was leaked to the Bureau. It is likely, Anthony, that Jurgen feared not only for himself but also for his children, for whom he was willing to sacrifice anything and everything. When the Council on African Affairs was dissolved, it left a substantial and significant gap in American society that, from the point of view of the CIA, needed to be filled safely by individuals who were not susceptible to communism. The Council on African Affairs had taken a position of active political and practical support for African liberation, a stance not adopted by the African American Institute, which sent members to the All African People's Conference in Accra in 1958. The AAI had been established in 1953 by a multiracial group of academics and businessmen with powerful mining interests in Central Africa. The academics included Horace Mann Bond, who had been president of Lincoln University, Nkrumah's alma mater. In 1951, 6 years after Nkrumah had left the US for Britain, Bond conferred on him the honorary degree of Doctors of Law. Bond went to Accra for Ghana's independence ceremony, and he also attended the AAPC the following year. By then, he was the dean of Atlanta University. He had been forced to resign from Lincoln University in 1957 because of concerns about its management. The stated aim of the AAI was to establish closer bonds between the peoples of Africa and the United States. It organized scholarship programs, teacher placements in Africa, and a variety of lectures, information and visitor services. The AAI headquarters were in New York City, where it had plush offices at 345 East 46th Street, only a 4-minute walk from the United Nations General Assembly, which facilitated access to United Nations delegates and events. It also had an office in Washington, centrally located at 1234 20th Street, and an office in Accra. It published a monthly magazine titled Africa Special Report, later Africa Report, which was edited by Bob Keith. But the AAI was not what it seemed. It was set up by the CIA. And they were showing interest as if to say they were interested in Africa. Are you following? Good. But the AAI was not what it seemed. This fact emerged in February 1967, when the New York Times published a series of articles revealing that a number of American organizations were fronts created by the CIA and were funded secretly through an array of pass-through channels and foundations. The starting pistol for the articles was fired by the underground magazine Rampart. An earlier series of articles about the CIA had appeared in the New York Times in 1966 without much impact. But now, the story took off. Like electricians tracing out the underground wiring of complicated circuits. Reported one journalist in 1969. Newsmen dug deeper and examined hundreds of foundation tax records and grant lists. Again and again, to their amazement, they succeeded in making connections between a labyrinth of non-profit organizations and a hidden generator. This generator was demonstrably the CIA. Eventually, more than 225 different organizations operating in many parts of the world, including Africa, were identified as direct or indirect recipients of CIA funds. Some of them were specially created by the CIA, while others had been set up independently from the agency and were then sponsored and funded by it. One of the CIA fronts, revealed the Washington Post on 26 February 1966, was the AAI. Bob Keith, the chief editor of the AAI journal, Africa Special Reports, was registered at the AAPC in Accra as an American press correspondent. In a dramatic moment, Keith was found hiding in the Accra Community Center during a closed session of the conference, which was off limits to the press. He was arrested by Ghanaian police, who discovered recording equipment on his person. Keith tried to justify why he was there. He said he had entered the building in order to obtain photographs from the center's official photographer. Several decades later, Kojo Botsio, Ghana's Minister of Foreign Affairs at the time of the AAPC, was asked about Keith's secretive behavior Bosio laughed as he remembered the occasion. Yes, I think he was a journalist who wanted to get to the place where he could record everything. He had a recording machine on him. At that time, it was a very silly thing to do. The AAI had put down roots in Accra before the AAPC. In 1957, it had established its West African office there under the leadership of Emmett Jefferson Pat Murphy, a historian of Africa who was the AAI's executive vice president. On the evening of Monday, the 8th of December, 1958, the AAI held a reception for AAPC delegates in Murphy's family home. This was an ideal opportunity for the AAI to network and build contacts with the future leaders of Africa. Another CIA front that sent representatives to the AAPC was the American Society of African Culture, known as AMSAC. Its links with the CIA were exposed by the New York Times on the 17th February 1967. It had been established in 1957 as a kind of American version of the Société Africaine du Culture, SAC, which was based in Paris. The SAC, led by Alioune Diop, a Senegalese philosopher who also attended the AAPC, had been publishing literature on negritude since the founding of his magazine, Présence Africaine, in 1947. The negritude movement had been started by Francophone intellectuals in the 1930s as a celebration of African culture. When AMSAC was first set up, its New York headquarters at 16 East 40th Street were shared with the Council on Race and Caste in World Affairs, CORAC, which was yet another front organization established by the CIA. CORAC claimed to examine the extent to which the communists were capitalizing on racial conflicts globally. In 1958, CORAC and AMSAC merged. The professed aim of AMSAC was to expose African Americans to their African heritage, and the organization was explicitly anti-communist, albeit avowedly apolitical. As well as offices in Paris and New York City, it had an apartment on Fifth Avenue to host guests. It gave scholarships to African students and published its own journal, African Forum. It also had an ambitious cultural and educational program. In 1961, it organized a music festival in Lagos, Nigeria, which lasted 2 days and nights and featured the cream of African American music talents, including Nina Simone. Because of its abundant resources, AMSAC was dubbed by some as Uncle Moneybag. But the artists benefiting from AMSAC's largesse at that time did not know it was a covert CIA front. AMSAC sent 3 representatives to the AAPC conference. One of these was its president, Horace Man Bond, who was also representing the AAI. Another representative was Will Massa Cook, a scholar of Francophone literature. He was on the faculty of Howard University but lived in Paris. The third AMSAC delegate was John Aubrey Davis, who was the executive director of AMSAC and a political scientist at City College, New York. He was also a commissioner in the New York State Commission Against Discrimination. All three were among the group of 5 African Americans who had founded AMSAC. Davis sent AMSAC at least 2 detailed reports on the speakers and events at the AAPC conference with careful analysis. They gave an account not only of the African delegates, but also of the other Americans who were at the conference. So one of the reports, he attached various Ghanaian newspapers, which listed the names of the conference delegates with their pictures. These reports were sent to James Theodore Ted Harris, Jr., who was the Assistant Executive Director of AMSAC and had been the National Student Association's second president in the late 1940s. In 1967, it was revealed that the National Student Association had been covertly used by the CIA. Harris had operated as an embedded CIA agent. According to the New Yorker, the National Student Association functioned as a glove that concealed the American government's hand and allowed it to do business with people who would never knowingly have done business with the American government. These people thought that they were dealing with a student group that was independent of the government. They had no idea that the NSA was a front. After the exposure of covert financing by the CIA, AMSAC's funding apparatus was dismantled. This left the organization scrambling about, looking for money. Membership declined sharply. People believed they had been fed lies and that their goodwill had been abused. The leaders of AMSAC claimed to have been the victims of official deception, but this claim is contradicted by evidence analyzed by Hugh Wilford in the mighty Wallitzer, How the CIA Played America. Wilford records that Adelaide M. Cromwell, a sociologist at Boston University and a co-founder of his African Studies Center, was a member of AMSAC's Executive Council. In February 1967, he wrote a memorandum to the other members which suggests, Wilford, right? A widespread state of wittiness within AMSAC. The memo stated, I remember the exact time and place, almost 8 years ago, when such a possibility was first confided in me, and by whom. Several years later, further and more detailed information was given me by another friend. Around the edges were frequent innuendos and asides. None of this was documented, understandably so. So Wilford also refers to an illuminating report by Yvonne Walker, the managing director of AMSAC. One day, according to this report, 2 members of the CIA showed up for an appointment with Dr. Davis. I didn't know who they were at the time, but they called me into the office and explained to me what was going down, and that they would require me to take an oath. Subsequently, Walker and other officers of AMSAC met with their CIA case officers in hotel rooms, usually in New York, but also in Washington. They, the CIA officers, were kept fully informed by Dr. Davis on everything that was going on. He recalled. And I'm sure that they helped to steer some of the plans. Wayne Urban, the biographer of Horace Mann Bond, tackles the issue of whether his subject was witting or unwitting, whether or not he knew that the AAI and AMSAC were CIA fronts. There is ample evidence, he writes, for concluding that if he did not know, he did not want to know. So, and if Bond did not know of these links, he adds, he should have known. Holban also points to a letter from Bond to Nkrumah, in which Bond asked for an invitation to the AAPC conference in Accra for AMSAC members, and described the organization as concerned with intellectual studies and artistic attainment. It is not a political organization, Bond said. This was not candid. This was not candid. 5 years, Urban. Since a distinct part of AMSAC's agenda was the pursuit of the political goals of American foreign policy. Another of the many American organizations exposed as CIA fronts in the 1960s was the Congress for Cultural Freedom, CCF, which was founded in 1950 and based at 104 Boulevard Haussmann in Paris, a handsome 19th century building in the center of the city. The CCF was the brainchild of Cord Meyer Jr., who headed a branch of the CIA called the International Organizations Division. Michael Joselson, a gifted polyglot, who was the executive director of the CCF and managed it in Paris, was a salaried CIA officer. Only a selected few of those who benefited from the Congress's sponsorship were told where its fund came from. The CCF functioned as an international group of liberal intellectuals, and at its height, was active on 5 continents, with offices in more than 30 countries. Among many other projects in different parts of the world, it ran an African program, of which the US academic Marcel Cook was director from 1960 to June 1961. The South African exile Ezekiel Umfalele then took over the helm. The CCF's core aim was to mobilize left-wing thinkers who were non-communists, according to Francis Stoner Saunders, the author of Who Paid the Piper? A detailed study of the CIA and the Cultural Cold War. These figures were designated as a group and non-communist left, NCL, in State Department and intelligence circles. In Latin America, where the Congress for Cultural Freedom subsidizes conferences, magazines and books from 1954, its dominant ethos resembled that of Western European social democracy, with strong anti-communism attached to moderate social reform in a democratic context. We all felt that democratic socialism was the most effective bulwark against totalitarianism, recalled the historian author M. Schlesinger Jr. some years later. Schlesinger knew the CIA origins of the Congress from the outset. explains Colonel Saunders, although he was not an employee of the agency himself. Indeed, a number of CCF members were aware of the CIA connection. In 1966, the budget for the CCF topped $2 million, equivalent to nearly $16.5 million in 2020. In April of that year, a team of correspondents at the New York Times wrote a series of 5 articles on the covert method of the CIA. These articles received little of the public attention that made the revelations published less than a year later, in February 1967. The third article of the series, which started on the front page